Hello, thank you for joining the last of this seminar series between Frontiers and the GuestXR project. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Amber Maimon and Iddo Wald, who are managers of the research team at Reichman University Institute for Brain, Cognition and Technology, which is directed by Professor Amir Ahmedi. Dr. Amber Maimon is a research associate and academic lab manager at this institute. She has a background in natural science, psychology, and philosophy of science. Her recent work centers around neuroplasticity, connections between the senses, and connections between body and mind. Iddo, on the other hand, is Chief Design and Technology Officer at the Institute and is leading human-computer interaction research in the lab. He worked as an electrical engineer for Intel, completed his master's in innovation design engineering from the Royal College of Art and Imperial College London, and co-founded an IoT wearables medical device startup. He then joined Reichman's University Media Innovation Lab, where he built and led the design and technology development team before joining this institute. So today they're going to talk about multisensory aspects of the GuestXR project, and I turn it over to you. They'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last seminar session of this series. We'll be talking about inclusion and social interaction in XR. I'm Amber.
And
oh, 1 second.
Yeah, that's us. The seminar. Thank you, Mel. Yeah, so
I'm Amber.
Iddo. Thanks, Mel already introduced us. Thanks for that.
And we're from the Brain, Cognition and Technology Institute, directed by Professor Amir Ahmedi. Professor Ahmedi is a world-renowned expert in neuroscience and specifically neuroimaging, neuroplasticity. He was one of the pioneers of multisensory research and multisensory neuroplasticity.
And importantly, he's also a trained musician, which is also surprisingly relevant to our talk. So a few words about the Institute and some context for the kind of research that we do. So as Amber mentioned before, we are a neuroscience lab, and this background in neuroscience, and we study the senses, so how we experience the world and sense the connections between the senses. And the way we do that is relatively unique. So we study the brain by developing new technologies, and we develop new technologies for based on what we know about the brain. So that is how we also connect to the GuestXR project, kind of taking a lot of the insights and knowledge that we know about the brain and connectivity between the senses to develop, simulate that out into new technologies and how people interact also in the real world, but also obviously in VR and so on. So for doing this kind of research, we have very unique infrastructures. So the first is our multisensory room, which is, first of all, as you can see, a room with a lot of speakers. So I have 97 speakers there surrounding the room. It's what's called an ambisonic system that allows us to localize sound in space in very high accuracy or simulate auditory spaces. But we also have a projection system, immersive projection system. We use obviously VR and AR in the room, and also all sorts of like haptic devices. So basically we have this like fully immersive, interactive, visual, auditory, and tactile environment where we can kind of play and create all sorts of multisensory experiences. But then we take all of those, a lot of things that we develop in that environment, and we take that outside, be it into like virtual augmented reality or into like wearable and devices in the wild, or into designing new environments, virtual or real. But we also take those things that we develop and take them to our basement, where we have an imaging center. So except for those infrastructure, we also have an imaging center that Amir also co-founded. And we use functional imaging for seeing what happens in people's brains actually when they experience or after they train with these multisensory experiences. and really study the underlying mechanisms of those experiences. And we'll give you some examples in a bit on how that kind of research is done and what you get from it.
So much of our research, as Iddo mentioned, is around the subject of the senses. While the traditional view on the senses and the division of the brain to different senses was that there are different sensory areas. So there's a visual area in the brain, an auditory area in the brain, motor areas in the brain, and so on and so on. Basically, what our research shows is that we provide this new perspective that because there are these hidden connections between the senses, the brain isn't actually divided in this way, and we'll explain more later on. Here you can see one very simple example. Many of you are probably familiar with this. It's a very well-studied phenomenon. We have two figures here. They're abstract shapes. But what we find is that if I give you the option of naming them, calling one of them Kiki and calling one of them Buba, 95% of people will call the right shape Buba and the left shape Kiki. And it doesn't matter exactly these names. It can be Duda or Mimi for the respective shapes. In all cultures, all over the world, no matter what language the people speak, this will be consistently 95% of people will call this one Buba and that one Kiki. And the reason is really interesting because basically we have these abstract shapes without any identity, but basically our senses, the interplay between what we see and what we hear and what our motor system is doing when we move our mouth in a round shape, for example, to say Buba, all of these together give these totally abstract shapes, personality, traits, we attribute certain things to them that we wouldn't otherwise. Another example of these hidden connections between the senses.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you one of those. So this is, I'm gonna play this video. I'm gonna play it 3 times. So believe me when I'm asking you to do this. I'm gonna play this video and I want to listen carefully to the sound while looking at the face on the right. So please just concentrate on the face on the right for the first time to play this.
Ba, ba, ba.
So can I yourself what sound was that you played? And I'm going to ask you to look at the face on the left and focus on the face on the left and listen to what you're playing. I'll play it again later, so take the time and focus on that one.
Ba, ba, ba.
So what you can probably have noticed, and I think that's true for, again, almost over 90% of the population, that when you look at the one face, you will hear a ba, ba, ba sound, and at the other, you hear a fa, fa, fa sound. If it's not clear by now, this is the same video file, and it is the same audio. I'm going to play it one more time for you. If you want, you can try and switch between them and see, because one of the interesting things about it is that we have no control over that. Like, it doesn't matter that you know that it's an illusion, you will still hear that through their vision.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
So what we see here is that what we heard is affected by the shape that is done using the lips. And that's a good example of how, we learned for such a long time. We saw how people speak, and we know how to associate the sound with the movement of the lips, that actually not only that we are hearing also through what we're seeing, it can even be stronger than our auditory experience. It actually overtakes our hearing experience. I think that's a good example to show how we actually don't hear with our ears or with our eyes, but we actually hear with our brains. And what we are doing in our research actually is we're studying all these fundamental principles and about the connections between the senses. And what we're doing, and following that, we're taking all those ideas and we're implementing them into applications and ways that we can help us interfere and assist us also with enhancing accessibility in VR. That's what we're doing as part of this consortium project. We also do that, as I said, to environments and so on. So I want to start with talking specifically, we're going to talk about different ways that we can apply this in VR and improve accessibility. I'm going to start with talking about the visually impaired and how we can assist them through these kind of connections between the brain and sensory substitution. So first example is a very well-known study that Amir performed back a few years ago. And it also demonstrates well, I think, the kind of philosophy and the things that we study here. So that's a good ground to understand that. So we're looking into, again, inspired by nature. Some animals are able to kind of see through sound, similar as like we did before around. Dolphins, bats are able to kind of localize so on through frequencies and sound. And what Amir did, he wrote an algorithm that translates image into sound. The translation is really, really simple. Now, if we would look, for example, at it just takes an image in front of it and scans it. For example, if we had a smiley face, it would look like this, would sound like this. Or a sad face. And here we add an element of color. So like this, we can represent different colors, different spaces, and you can direct this algorithm at simple shapes, but you can also direct it at really, really complex things, or any image in the world. I would put the camera towards it, will play just a sound. And what we did, we took this algorithm, we started with these simple shapes, and we trained people for a very, very long time, for about 30 to 70 hours. Get started with simple shapes, went into like real images or even videos. And the interesting things, we were able to take people who are blind from birth, and after an extensive training, can use a camera that's placed on their head and perform very complex tasks. So what you see here in this video is Hamutal in an IPEX conference demo. And you can see how she's able to pick up a bottle of Sprite from the different bottles, or a red apple from a bowl of green apples. So this is both a perception of space and a perception of color. And all of those kind of reaching out and doing that, someone who was congenitally blind and never experienced color in the way that seeing people do, and so on.
What was interesting is that not only, and this was tried again and again with congenitally blind people, with late blind people, and with blindfolded sighted people, what was very, very consistent is that not only behaviorally, they can learn to use the system to a very high level of accuracy and precision, but also when we took them down into the MRI and scanned their brain to basically see what happens in their brain when they're seeing through sound, what we saw is that the people who had been extensively trained on using this algorithm had activation in the whole back section of their brain, which is basically what would commonly be known as the visual areas in the brain. So basically, by seeing through sound, they were activating visual areas. This is particularly interesting in the blind because they don't have activation in these areas for vision at all. They don't have visual experience. So basically a couple things. First of all, on the right here, you can probably all recognize Marilyn Monroe. So this is basically the resolution of the iMusic algorithm that scans the visual scene, turning the pixels of the 1,500 pixels of the visual scene into pixels of sound at a resolution which people can recognize faces, because this is an important trait for people to have in their arsenal. Now, the middle image basically shows that not only does this seeing through sound after extensive training lead to activation of the visual cortex, the visual areas in the brain, there's also a subdivision of this area of the brain into specifications. This means that if someone were seeing a face through sound, the visual face area would be active, as though they were seeing a face were they a seeing person. And you can see on the very left that in some cases, we even saw a complete overlap. In many cases, we saw a complete overlap between the blind seeing through sound, for example, seeing an apple through sound, and the sighted, for example, seeing an apple, actually seeing the apple. So basically what this told us is something very breakthrough about the brain and how it functions, basically. What this leads us to think is that specializations in the brain can be trained to develop without visual experience, and that the brain is not dependent on different senses, but rather different tasks. So I'll give you one example from this quite complex image. We have on the very left in orange, something that's known as its LOC, it's the visual object recognition area. What research indicates is that this area is usually active for vision, but when vision isn't an option, for example, in the blind, the same area can undergo its processing task by using other senses, for example, sound or tactile senses, leading us to think that the brain is task specific and not sensory specific. This is another interesting study we conducted on a man who had vision for the beginning of his life, and he gradually lost vision until complete blindness in adulthood, after which he had a retinal implant installed in his eye. It's a bionic eye, basically. What a bionic eye does is it, think of if you were rubbing your eyes really hard, you have these lights in your eyes from the electrical stimulation of the eye. So that's basically what this device does. What we see is that simply stimulating the retina or the nerves doesn't actually mean that the person is having a visual experience. So what he did was he was also extensively trained on the eye music algorithm for a period of about a year. And this actually allowed him to see a much more intricate view of the world, much more resembled the vision he remembered from early in life. For example, he could see a banana through sound and actually feel that it was grabbing the memory of a banana from his mind, and he would have the visual image. Another thing we learned from studies such as this is that this specific algorithm, the iMusic algorithm, took many hours of training. So we started to look at things that are much more like, how can we make this more intuitive, so that people won't need to learn it like learning a language for 70 hours, for a year, whatever was the exact duration. So for example, we developed the topo speech algorithm, which shortens the learning process by adding an element of language, which is basically so important to humans that we immediately understand the naming of specific objects in the world, but we represent their spatial location through auditory properties. So for example, this image would sound like
dog, bicycle, truck.
Thank you.
Too embarrassed to
And finally, we not only implemented these things out in the world and had people use them in the wild, but also here you can see an example of the eye cane that was initially developed to allow the blind to spatially locate themselves or to navigate outside in the real world. And we implemented it afterwards in VR and saw activation in navigation areas in the blind population for using it in VR. So here you can see a quick video. Here you can see a congenitally blind person using the eye cane device to walk through a real life maze. And then we basically implemented this in VR as well. And what we found was the corresponding activation in navigation areas for spatial navigation through sonification, basically in VR.
So this is a good example of implementing those ideas already in virtual reality. And you see now also algorithms like the topo speech, which uses language, we're developing now to add more dimensions of information, representing depth and so on, and using this also in like binaural systems to treat with like headphones and directional audio within VR. And the great advantage of doing all these things, you know, we test them in real life, but then exporting all of those things into VR allows VR to be much more accessible. And also the beautiful thing about VR is that it gives us a possibility to enhance these abilities dramatically, because we know so much more about the information around us and control it much better. So we can actually enhance all of those abilities by multipliers. And that was a lot of the things that our colleagues in GuestXR are now implementing within the platform that's developed. So moving on from the visually impaired, let's talk about hearing impaired. So as we started before, if the other nature inspirations and the transition from visual to auditory, crickets have a unique extra hearing organ within their joints, which is very sensitive to vibration. And they get another perspective of like auditory signals through that vibration. And we're looking into the idea of translating audio into touch through vibration. And this is also relevant to what Amber was saying before about long training times, because these systems of vibration and audio and sound are related also in such development and so on. So they're very related systems, and the correlations between them are very tight. And what we did in the first experiment, we just made a kind of speech-to-touch system. So a system that translates speech into vibration. It's similar to what you get if you would touch a speaker when you feel the basses, but that's the point, exactly, you feel basses. So a lot of the auditory signal is not actually tactile. So we had to develop an algorithm that translates the auditory frequency to hold the important information of it, to be able to sense it through these like devices that you see here. And what we were able to see in our experiments is that you get an immediate effect of improving the ability to understand speech within noise, of improvement of what's called like 6 dBs after a very, very short training. I think under an hour, you would get like a 10 dB improvement in speech comprehension. That for the number, that means basically it could double the ability of understanding speech within noise. So this already kind of has a lot of implications in regards to accessibility in different environments also, different applications. But we saw this correlation, we saw how powerful that is, and we started exploring some other ideas, thinking, actually, if that correlation is so strong, what if we could kind of translate other properties of audio? So one interesting thing that we do with our ears, being that we have 2 of them, we're able to localize sound very well. We can say if sound comes from there or there. And the way that we do it is by kind of our brain compares the input the signals that we get from our 2 ears, and by the different little differences in time and in strength of the signal, we can say if the signal comes from this place or the other. So we created a first of its kind system that simulates that relationship between the ears through touch. So we're able to basically kind of create some sort of augmented reality through touch, localizing, putting information localized in space through vibration. So this is, again, a helpful tool for many use cases and scenarios, and also especially, of course, for accessibility. And we were looking into different people that are not able to localize through sound. And the extreme case of that is people with like who are congenitally deaf. And what you see in the picture here are Dana and Tamar. And as part of shooting of a TV show here in our lab, the producers invited Tamar and Dana to experience this device. This was the first time that we tried this with congenitally blind, and we'll explain a bit more about experience in a short video now.
זה מקום ממש יפה פה.
שלום, שלום, מאוד, אמיר.
נעים, תמר.
אהלן.
אני דנה.
אהלן, דנה. נולדתם בעצם...
חרשות לגמרי, כן.
חרשות לגמרי. למעשה זה מפגש ראשון שלנו עם מישהו שעבר שתל קוכליארי. דרך אגב, איך זה היה לכם?
מגיל 4 שתל אחד, ואז אחרי 11 שנה עברנו את השני.
כאילו בגיל 14 ובגיל 3.
אז יש פער כאילו בשני אוזניים.
עד היום אני שומעת 2 ערוצים שונים.
זה די מדהים, כי נראה שאנחנו מנהלים שיחה ואתם שומעות בדיוק כמוני, אבל למעשה מתחת לפני השטח קורים דברים אחרים לגמרי. אם אתם עוצמות עכשיו את העיניים, סתם סקרנות, כן?
שם איפשהו.
עוד פעם, אוקיי? מה את אומרת, דנה?
פה?
הסיבה שאתם לא יכולות לעשות מיקום כל כך טוב, זה בגלל שאוזן אחת קיבלה יתרון בגיל מאוד צעיר, האוזן השנייה רק בגיל 14, בשביל למקם דברים, אתה חייב את ההשוואה בין שתי האוזניים.
אתה יכול לראות להם את החדר שבו אפשר לבדוק איך כל הדברים האלה משתלבים?
בטח. אנחנו בעצם פיתחנו פה מערכת שמיעה מלאכותית מרטט. אנחנו התחילים עם 5 צלילים, והצלילים האלה זזים פה במרחב.
יש ציפור וינשוף בג'ונגל, אנחנו בג'ונגל.
נכון, בג'ונגל כזה, בדיוק. אחד מהצלילים מחובר לך לאצבעות, תתרכזי 20 שניות ותגידי לי...
ינשוף.
אבל זה לא עברו 20 שניות, איך עשית כל כך מהר?
אני מסתכלת, אבל כל כך מרגיש שזה ינשוף.
מדהים, מדהים. עכשיו בוא ננסה להגיד לי איפה הצליל נמצא. תני את הראש לפי הינשוף עם הרטט. בוא נראה אם תצליחי. יפה.
את שומעת את האנשוף?
כן, אבל אני לא יודעת איפה.
הנה, בן מצביעה בדיוק לאיפה שהראש שלך מצביע.
אני חייב להגיד שזה מטורף, כי אני לא שומע מה שהיא... תקשיבו, היא עושה ככה, כאילו...
אני מבטיחה לך, כשתשבי פה, את תביני מהר.
עכשיו תנסי למצוא את הינשוף בלי הרטט. איפה הוא?
לא יודע, הכל...
קרס.
עליי, לא יודעת, אני לא יודעת. כמו שתמר שומעת.
תשמעו, זה מטורף, זה מרגש.
So you saw here our kind of first experiment with that, and you can see the excitement is very genuine for us. One thing that we didn't show in the video that we tried a bit later, and you were welcome to watch the show, and I did. The future is already here in Cannes. Is that we tried to play for the music. So what we saw, similar with the cochlear implant, similar to what you had with the visual implant, it stimulates the nerves. You kind of go through the auditory system, but they get a very, very, shallow experience of sound. And they were reporting how they don't really enjoy music. They don't get what it's about. Which for us was a shame to hear, because as I said, we're all like into very much music people. And what we saw, we played music for them through vibration, and we found that we were able to get a much more full experience, especially when we use the sound location. We separate different channels and different instruments or voice into different directions through touch. And they were really able to kind of feel like they're in the scene and experiencing the music. So I think, again, it's a good example of how that's kind of sensory substitution, rather than like this hardcore, like direct approach through going through the stimulating the nerve, but actually kind of going directly to the brain gives you a much more rich experience and allows like other levels of accessibility.
Now, another direction we've been exploring more and more recently is improving accessibility using multisensory tools for the emotionally challenged. So, for example, we know that our sensory perception is very instrumental in the bidirectional relationship between our mind and our body. This is one famous example published in a British medical journal. This is a construction worker who basically he was working and he stepped on a nail, and the nail went through his boot, and he started screaming and yelling, and the ambulance came and took him to the hospital. His physiological signs showed extreme suffering and an extreme physiological response. When he got to the hospital, they took off his boot, and basically they saw that the nail had gone between 2 fingers and hadn't pierced his skin. So basically what happened here is that the sensory experience, the visual experience, so strongly affected him that it actually induced this subjective feeling of extreme pain, leading to physiological pain parameters. So basically what we say is that we can do exactly the opposite. If pain can be induced by sensory means, we want to do the opposite. We want to help by using the senses and the connections between the senses, we want to improve people's emotional experiences. One of the ways we did this is really taking it to the macro level outside in the real world, is through our collaboration with Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center in Jerusalem. where we actually took part in the construction of their new cancer treatment wing. This is what it looks like. And we basically implemented multisensory experiences very similar to those that we can produce in our multisensory room, our special facility in the Institute, in the actual treatment facility and the treatment rooms. So here, for example, you can see the CT simulator environment. We have speakers on the walls for creating a spatial audio scene. We have this special curved visual screen for all kinds of visual implementations. We have sensory substitution audiotactile devices there as well. So it's a full multisensory experience that basically meets the patient in their first encounter with the oncology department in this CT simulator environment.
So we've started designing there also all these kind of experiences that are focused around the specific needs there. And what you see here is first inspired experience there, which we did together with Yoav Cohen, by the way, who's a visual artist, director, and also helps design the space in the hospital. And it's taking from the one of our insights from working in the medical environments, we were looking into experiences of claustrophobia, so claustrophobia in the MRI. And we looked into how we can use these multisensory tools for relieving some of the stresses in claustrophobia. What we did in this work, we looked into all the underlying mechanism of that problem, disorder, so like everything that has to do with fear of suffocation, lack of control, feeling of being trapped. And we used the element of embrethment, so representations of one's own breath, to create agency. So in a situation when you're not allowed to move or do anything within the MRI, your breath is the one thing that you can control. And as you see, what you see here is an avatar that represents one's own breath, and you control it through your breath, and is meant to enhance one's sense of agency and feeling of control in the world. And also what we saw is that we can also enhance embodiment through that representation of the body signal. So it also kind of places you in a way, the patient, within this open, free environment, and enhances their interoception, their perception of their own breath through that representation of breath. And again, these are tools that we're creating in virtual environments that we feel can be useful for all of those different means. Further exploring that the idea of the interest of breath, we created a experience that, there are a lot of benefits that are related for breath within all of those contexts of reducing anxiety and enhancing focus and so on. So we're looking into designing other experiences that react to one's own breath, and specifically focusing more on the element of interoception, so awareness of one's own body and all the kind of psychological benefits that are associated with that. Specifically, there's a lot of research that shows that people that are less connected emotionally are also less connected physically. So they have like a decreased sense of interoception, and those two things are correlate. And we've been looking, see Olga here from our team, demoing a system that she developed, which uses this haptic feedback, like a vibration feedback, to represent to one their own heartbeat. And through that, we're trying to enhance interoceptive senses and allow people to feel their own heartbeat. So we kind of teach them through that multisensory experience, which is difficult for some people. Some of you might be hearing and aware of what your heartbeat is. Many of us don't. And so kind of through improving that experience and enhancing interoception, we aim to enhance their kind of emotional regulation and abilities. So we'll be doing all sorts of interactions like these. For example, also looking into attention and how we can direct attention through these like touch interfaces that we develop that can direct your attention and focus to different places in space, and also using those techniques associated with attention training techniques, which are like very well formed psychology methods from psychology, or in reducing anxiety and helping with focus and so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of a quick cover of different tools and methods that we use and can implement within VR and for enhancing accessibility for those that require that. But and a lot of those methods now already go and are being implemented with our partners within the consortium into the different platforms we're developing. We thought that we have a few more minutes, and I see that we do. We'll tell you a bit more about how we can use these tools also for enhance kind of everyone's experience, because obviously a lot of those things can go not only for accessibility for those who have the difficulties or limitations, but also for those who don't. And also we can use these tools to also enhance our sensory ability or perception and create, especially in virtual environments, an enhanced experience to the one that we currently have. So one example of that, again, looking into nature, there are some animals that are able to experience frequencies that we don't. So for example, see in infrared, which means, in other words, to see sound. So snakes are able to do it. If you look at the mantis shrimp, their perception of the world is much wider than ours, and they see it in a very different way. So we're thinking how we can use the tools that we have, for example, the iMusic algorithm, for instead of allowing blind people to see, to enhance and expand our sensory ability. So what you see in this example, as a quick demo of how that could work. So if we look at this image of 3 glasses, they all look the same. But if we look at a thermal image, we see that they all have different temperatures. So one of them is hot, one is less hot, and one is actually in room temperature. So if we take that image and we strip out all the background noises and only put the things that are hot, and we translate that through the iMusic algorithm, we'll get something like this. Which could create, which would create this. So it could create this kind of added layer to what we experience through sound, allowing us, after an extent, both immediately, but especially after an extent training, to be something that we don't hear, but just kind of expand our visual experience to also seeing thermal frequencies. Slide. Yeah.
Okay, and another thing we've been looking into with respect to enhancing all of our sensory experience, whether it's out in the world and whether it's in VR, is expanding the visual range or expanding our perceptual range to 360 degrees. In one experiment we did, we basically used the person's vision to represent the front, basically where they can see with their eyes, but we represented the rest of the 360-degree space by using seeing through sound, basically using the iMusic algorithm. What we found that's really interesting, and we're using it for many different things now, is that not only were people able to do this, they were also able to integrate the visual perception with the vision through sound. So basically they could draw the full scene as though they had experienced it in simultaneity, which was very significant and exciting for us. And this has many implications going forward.
So thank you so much for taking the time to discuss. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions. And do follow us and do all the
follow us on social media.
Yeah, interesting things, I think.
So thanks very much. This is a really brilliant way to end this series of talks. It's fantastic talk and really interesting. So I wonder if there's any questions. There's a request on the Q&A from Jessica Stone. Please, could you put the article reference to the eye cane in the chat? And Jason Ortiz is asking, is seeing through sound available for virtual reality? Can people train themselves?
All right. Good questions. We'll do at the end of the session, we'll be happy to share the link on if you want to stay online, then we'll share the link for sure. No worries about that.
There are a couple.
Yeah.
Actually, we have a paper. It's a number of papers. Some on the physical eye-cane, some on the virtual eye-cane. We just had a paper published in Current Biology using the virtual eye-cane. So
yeah, it's interesting.
I guess we'll
also
share.
Interesting because it does that. In some implementation, we do it through vibration, through tactile, and some through sound.
Yeah.
So in VR, we do it through sound.
We'll definitely share that.
Yeah, we'll share a few links in the chat at the end of the session if you want me to stay. Regarding implementations in VR for the iMusic, so the iMusic has an accessible algorithm, not of the iMusic, but a more simple version of it called the Voice. So if that is something that you're interested in, then you can find and explore that. It doesn't represent color, but it's like a really cool, interesting application, and that's available for training and use. I think we might even have our training somewhere online available. If that's something that someone's specifically interested in, then just write us an email and we'll be happy to share.
Right, exactly. Write us. And we also had a paper published a couple years ago on like a self-training program for the iMusic, basically. So if you're interested in that, contact us.
Yeah,
it's a paper published by Galit Books et al.
Yeah,
Amira Mehdi, Galit Books, and we can also share that.
I think generally we're implementing a lot of these ideas now into the GuestXR platform. Specifically, the iMusic, as I said, required extensive training. So I don't think that is something that we plan to implement. If it's something that you are interested in implementing, contact us, and we'll be happy to help with that.
And I don't know if the speakers can see the Q&A. Jason Ortiz said that this session was amazing. I learned so much.
Yeah.
And Jessica Stone is very interested in any resources that you can provide.
So first of all, thank you very much. Very happy to hear that. And I think since we're first of all, I don't know if it's apparent, but we're very excited to be here and a bit stressed. So if you can, if you have any further questions or thoughts, if you can just hit us at I'm gonna write our email here in the chat.
Yeah.
It wasn't our last slide, but you probably missed that. So I'm just gonna share that with some panelists. I don't know how I don't know how we do this. I'm gonna ask the team here to share.
You can put it. You can actually. Can you see the chat there? Oh no, but it's only going to host.
I can only go to the team, so I'm gonna write it there.
Okay, put it in the Q&A.
In the Q&A. Wow, this is a surprise. I thought I'm technically capable.
I mean, maybe just copy paste it into.
It's this Zoom. I think everyone sees something slightly different.
Yeah, apparently so. So I'm gonna share screen for a second more, and if one of the team can share our email that I wrote as well. So it's just like either Amedileb at Rooney ACIL or our names at Rooney.
It's basically first name, last name at rooney.ac.il. So
do not be shy and feel free to hit us up with any questions. We're really excited about getting all these ideas out to the world. So
thank you guys for being with us.
Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any other questions? Just one last one from me. I mean, the one where you hear sounds based on what the camera is seeing. How long is typically the training, and could people really walk around with this in everyday life?
So we had. I'm tempted to show you the slide now, but we had the training takes a long time. So people extend like 30, 70 hours worth of training.
Right.
But those who did kind of survive and went through, a lot of them were able to reach really amazing results. So we have some videos in the backup slides of people, for example, wandering around their house looking for slippers and being able to find themselves in space and like localize items in the environment and so on. And you kind of see also, like you saw that scan, and after you train for a long time, you know, they increase the time of the refresh rate, and it's like much faster scan. And yeah, they actually see it in real time video, and it's pretty crazy to try to, if you haven't trained, it's pretty crazy experience. You think that one can experience, understand things from that, but they do. There's really amazing ability to.
I mean, I keep sending people to read our lab's papers, but basically some of the papers refer to people actually going, I mean, this was as part of research. I mean, this isn't a consumer product, but as part of the research, people were in the supermarket getting vegetables and picking out specific things. So this was used in that way. And I think that amount of training depends also on what you want to represent. I think the minimum was tens of hours and the maximum was 70, 100. I mean, it's very extensive training in general.
Yeah, well, in a way, it's understandable that it's extensive, because it's kind of replacing a sense that doesn't exist properly, doesn't work properly. So of course, yeah.
Thanks. But other things we're doing are, as we said, like with the hearing impaired, the audio to tactile conversion, that's very intuitive. It requires almost no training at all. Yeah. So it really depends on the conversion and on what it is exactly that you're doing. For example, the topo speech that uses language is much more intuitive. Yeah. It takes almost no training. And that's also a conversion of spatial information to audio.
Yeah, and I think especially in VR, where you have a lot of information about different things in the environment and their location and so on, this is a very powerful tool to represent spatial information. Yeah.
It will be very, very powerful in VR, yeah, because the program knows everything that's there and where it is, exactly everything about it. Okay, any last questions? If you want to ask a question by actually talking, you just unmute yourself. Otherwise, we're finished now. Anyone has any questions?
Hi, Mel. Yeah, I have a question, if I could.
Yeah.
Jason. I was curious just what advice you all have about if we are interested in, designing multisensory experiences in VR, kind of where the beginner's guide, where to start.
We really go to the papers,
perhaps.
Of course.
Read the papers, yeah.
I mean, I can tell you where our inspiration comes from. So as we said, we really take this fundamental understanding of the types of multisensory experiences and what can be done by employing these connections between the senses and things like that. And I think it kind of goes alongside that pretty naturally, because once you know, for example, we're doing this amazing collaboration on pseudo haptics with our partners in this program. Yeah. Once you understand these kind of things, then you're like, oh, wait, but this can be used in that way, or something else can be used in another way. So it kind of really, for us, it starts from a fundamental understanding of, I think, the psychology, the cognitive science, and the neuroscience underlying it.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that once you kind of, first of all, hear a talk like this, and you kind of can get start developing a bit of an intuition of the basic understanding of sensory substitution and how it works in the brain, and get and the connection to nature. So, there's a lot of the development stage of the connection between different systems and how that makes it more intuitive, and looking in nature as an inspiration, both for these kind of translations and so on. And because what's natural is natural, and that works really well. Yeah. So to kind of develop the basic understanding and to build on top of that the intuition, and from that then from there just practice and experimentation. We prototype a lot, so it's always a good approach.
Thanks very much. Any last questions? Okay, thank you very much for this brilliant end to this series of seminars. And I look forward to seeing you in the next GuestXR meeting.
And Mel, thank you so much for hosting.
Yeah, thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody
fine.
for joining us. We're really, yeah.
And thanks to Frontiers for helping and organizing this. And I think that's it. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.